Welcome to Fanzines, Days of Future Past, presented at the London 2014 World Science Fiction Convention by Carolyn E. Cooper. Part 1. Printing Techniques. In the 1980s, fanzines were printed on paper and distributed by mail or hand. Initially, they were limited to the older, cheaper forms of production such as carbon copies, hectograph, mimeograph, ditto, and the offset printing press. Photocopied fanzines began appearing in the late 70s to mid-80s as universities, research centers, government offices, and large corporations replaced offset with on-site copiers. Businesses, universities, government sites, and other fan employers soon discovered they needed to track employee use of the company photocopiers, or go bust. I thank many companies for their unwitting patronage in the production of some of my favorite zines. Photocopy fanzine printing, however, did not become truly cost-effective until the mid to late 80s when photocopy machines became affordable and no longer required an engineering degree to operate, causing photocopy shops to appear on every corner like a bring-your-own-caffeine Starbucks. Here are some examples of 80s Mimeo fanzines. At the time, large commercial printers required a print run of 10,000 copies or more, not cost-effective for fanzines, thus making Mimeo, ditto, and even typed carbon copies the only cost-effective option, well, outside of pirated photocopying. Therefore, production quality varied greatly. Initially, the text was typewritten directly on the printing master. Dirty keys filled with gunk, uneven strikes appeared fainter or even out of alignment. As word processors and computers entered the scene, dot matrix and daisy wheel printers produced more consistent, legible type. Consistency, however, is not always beautiful. The introduction of electronic and digital typesetting greatly improved the legibility, especially at smaller font sizes. But it did not necessarily improve the readability. Probably the first typeset zine, certainly the first digital typeset media zine, was IDIC 6. Lilker's printer had an early electronic typesetting machine and gave her access after hours to produce the 172-page master. Computers introduced new opportunities, production, and distribution methods, as well as new problems. And some things never seem to change. Text in the image reads, quote, "inspired by the zine panel discussion which lamented the decline in zine fandom," unquote. It seems with each new technology, someone is announcing a decline. The AggieCon zine number 12 was a single-issue zine produced in real time at AggieCon number 14 on an Osborne portable computer with 98K floppy drives, printed with a Smith Corona daisy wheel printer, distributed by hand, 5-inch floppy disk, and later online through CompuServe and BBS servers. Kids, ask your grandparents about the technology. Or, just check Wikipedia. Distributing zines by post was increasingly costly. Amateur press associations, or APAs, were created to share the cost among a group of publishers. The first APA was formed by U.S. Philadelphia printers in 1876. The first British APA was formed in 1890. The first science fiction fantasy APA was created in the U.S. in 1937. Zines were either mailed in a round robin, with each recipient adding his or her own contribution and comments before sending the entire collection on, or several zines were bound together and shipped to a collective mailing list. For the Dallas area APA number 9, the cover color was hand-applied highlighter pen. Included in DAPA number 9 is a 4-page zine by Bradley Wayne Joseph Mark Foster, aka the award-winning artist Brad W. Foster, containing no artwork beyond the hand-lettered title. Hand coloring is added individually to the finished printing. Spot color is the technique of using a different printing plate or screen and print run to add another ink, usually a different color, to a previously printed paper. Any reproductive printing method could use spot color, offset press, mimeograph, silkscreen, even potato printing. To print with spot colors, a printing plate for the first color would be created and printed. This would be the first print run. A printing plate of the next color would be made. The printing press would be cleaned and re-inked with the new color, and the entire first run would go through the printing press again. If the alignment or registration of the two print runs were not perfect, you got bleeds and gaps. Even the best printers estimated a 10% failure per run. Temperamental presses or humid days could cause up to 25% loss or more of, quote, good, unquote, sheets. Despite the multiple colors, this is not spot color. It was a single plate, single run offset gradient printing. This is a spot color job. A separate plate and run were used for the black as well as the gradient border. However, it only took 2 runs because the gradient colors were produced by feeding 3 separate inks to the print rollers simultaneously. Master artists and printers like David Goines were doing up to 26 separate color runs on old Heidelberg printing presses in the 1970s and 80s. His work inspired a number of zine publishers and artists. Spot color offset printing, particularly in posters, reached its zenith at the turn of the 19th century. Late 19th century graphic artists began working with halftone screens for gradients in their spot color runs. Developed initially in the mid-19th century, halftone printing creates a full tonal range by breaking the image into dots. Halftone screens can be used by most any printing technique. Well, maybe not potato print. Eventually, halftone color experiments led to the development of the 4-process color printing, also known as CMYK. CMYK separates the image into 4 plates, each halftone screen color at a different angle, which are then overprinted in 4 runs. Examples of a spot color version on the left and a 4-color process on the right. Until digital color separation was developed in the 1960s and 70s, CMYK was far too expensive. By the 1980s, digital color separation and the competition of photocopiers in black and white printing created an affordable 4-color cover offset printing market. Fan artists rejoiced. Part 2. Some very fast history. Fan magazines and ABBAs existed in various forms since the mid to late 1800s. The Comet, edited by Raymond Palmer and Walter Dennis in 1930, is considered the first science fiction fantasy fan magazine, or, quote, fanzine, unquote, a term coined by Russ Chauvenet in 1940. Originally, science fiction and fantasy fanzines could contain anything related to science fiction and fantasy: nonfiction, commentary, reviews, poetry, fiction, art, event listings, and letters of comment called LOCs. Personal zines, or perzines, were the equivalent of blogs. LOC zines shifted online, first as mailing lists and then as discussion boards. Comments usually exceeded 140 characters, and flame wars smoldered for far longer, though trolls still abound. The 1980s not only offered the full range of fanzine production techniques, but was when homoerotic fan fiction, called slash, came out from under the table, and media fans and media fanzines were pushed out of science fiction and fantasy fandom. In the 80s, File 770 was a traditional science fiction and fantasy zine containing brief news items, con reports, upcoming events, letters of comment, and commentary. File 770 won the Hugo in 2008 and is now available online, ironically including a Sharknado 2 trailer and promotion of A Very Trek Day. Look closely. Note the pejorative reference to Trekkies despite being a Doctor Who con. Also note the implication that 48,000 attendees isn't a successful con. The largest world con was 6,832. And Doctor Who fans get further denigration in the page footer by calling it a bunch of hooey. Media zines initially resembled traditional science fiction and fantasy zines and were a subset of science fiction and fantasy zines. Media zines, however, soon focused on fan fiction and artwork. While men wrote and edited most traditional science fiction and fantasy zines, media zines were largely produced by women. Media fandom and media fanzines produced an explosion of women-owned small press publishers and print shops in the 1980s, causing the creation of the ad zine. To borrow from Annie Lennox and Aretha Franklin, sisters were doing it for themselves. Like Locus or Publishers Weekly, ad zines listed zine availability, submission requirements, delays, and other related information. Media fanzines and art quickly developed their own fan-run conventions, notably Media WestCon, where the Fan Q Awards were announced, and Itakon, the first SlashCon. Then came the Internet, and fanzines came to an... With apologies to 1066 and all that, a memorable history of England, comprising all the parts you can remember, including 103 Good Things, 5 Bad Kings, and 2 Genuine Dates, by W.C. Seller and R.J. Yeatman. Highly recommended, and thank you.